Hi everybody, welcome to Paul and Ted's Talk Time. And today we're talking about freedom of speech. Hmm. Freedom of speech, Paul. What
Mm.
exactly do we mean by that?
I think the ability to impart our own opinions totally unrestricted.
Totally unrestricted. Oh, well, what about us two here? We can say what we like. I mean, obviously, if
No,
we
we can't.
we can't. What, to each
No.
other?
In the privacy of this garden without the camera being
Yeah,
on.
that's what I
Yeah,
meant.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, yes, I think we can. I think, yeah, I'd go along with that, wouldn't you?
Okay, but obviously that's not how we define freedom of speech, is it?
Well, freedom of speech, let's look at it. What is it? It's words, isn't it? What do people do with words? They humiliate, they joke, they play, um, they praise, they wordcraft. They do an awful lot with their words. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I was to say, well, what is freedom of speech? I'd probably say it's knowledge. Knowledge, yeah.
Yeah, how do you mean?
Well, that's how we communicate our knowledge, isn't it? By our opinions and building on them and sharing and evolving and constructing and
Yeah, but if I was going to ask you, do we have freedom of speech? Which I mean, people would ask. I mean, the question is, do we? I mean, if it's, we've established if it's just us two talking without the camera,
well,
yes, we are. But if we added, let's say, 10 people to the table, would we then have to mind our P's and Q's?
well, it comes at a cost, doesn't it? Uh, I mean, a cost of being socially ostracized
Mm,
and
yeah.
alienated, perhaps.
Mm.
A cost of being slain, attacked.
But is that the correct definition? The fact that you have to sort of, let's say, for want of a better way, talk respectively to people. Is that it? Is that freedom of
Well,
speech, or is it just
is
having to
this is mollycoddling you're talking about, isn't it?
mollycoddling? Yeah.
You've now got to, apparently, it appears that you've now got to tailor your speech to mollycoddle certain elements or
Mm.
groups or fringes of society or religions or whatever.
Right.
And there are laws, apparently. Now there are laws even in well-established
Yeah, but I
universities,
think the point you made before. Let's take 10. Let's pick 10 friends of ours, and we put them round the table. And of course, we know these people well, and we know what we can say and what we can't. But there's no laws here, are there? If you have a
well,
one
there's
too many,
unwritten laws,
what?
aren't there? There are unwritten social
Right.
laws.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, so we have those guidelines. Are they guidelines we're familiar with? I mean,
Well, the interesting thing is, when you look at these guidelines, name me one person who is the arbitrator or the judge who says you cannot say something. Can you name one person who says to you you cannot say something that you want to say?
not in my everyday life. No, I don't think so.
So therefore, taking that as an example,
Mm.
we could argue that you have freedom of speech, do you not?
Yeah, in as much as I would choose only to be with the people who I could say what I liked to.
Okay, but just let me reiterate my question here.
Right, right, right.
I've just asked you, name me one person who says to you, Edward, you cannot say X, Y, Z.
Yeah, but there are people who I would talk to where I
I'm not
would.
asking who you would talk to. I'm asking who would tell you you can't
Oh no,
say
nobody
that.
tells me that. No, that's
So,
fair enough.
so therefore, we can say that we have freedom of speech. You just don't choose to exercise that. Would that be a fair comment? Given what I've just said, that there's nobody telling you you can't say it.
No, nobody telling me, but I still have constraints.
These are self-imposed constraints?
I mean, for my own convenience, yeah, I guess they are. I mean, getting into trouble, losing a friend, to a greater degree, running into
So
legal
this is
issues.
self kind of monitored
Yeah. Mm.
freedom of speech.
Yeah, I think applies to everybody. I really do. Absolutely.
Okay, but it doesn't mean that people don't have the right or the 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 right to have that freedom of speech.
It depends what you mean by freedom. If you're talking about
Well,
everything,
freedom from what?
well, being allowed to say whatever you like to whoever you like, that doesn't exist.
Well, okay. I'll try again. I'm sorry to be putting you on the spot here,
Hmm.
but who's telling you? I've asked you, name somebody who
Well, there's
who tells you rather
mhm.
that you cannot say X, Y, and Z.
There's nobody who tells me, but you are self-moderating, aren't you?
Um, of course, I can fully understand what you're saying here, but
Yeah.
I'm pushing it and asking myself the same question. By the
Mm.
way, I mean,
Hmm.
who is telling me I can't say that?
Hmm.
Is it written down somewhere? I suppose there are laws that have come into effect. That
It's a bit like morality, though, isn't it? In some respects. I mean, you have your own personal guidelines to how you conduct your life, and it's right and wrong, isn't it? Yeah. But these days, like you said before, yeah, things are different. You have to be perhaps more careful now than you were, like 30 years ago. And people are, for whatever reason, more sensitive, or we're led to believe that that is the case.
Well, I think if I just answer my own question there, I've asked you, name one person, blah blah blah,
Hmm.
and then I've just said myself that there are laws. So
Mm.
somebody is making those laws,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So who are the people reining those in who want to have ultimate freedom or absolute freedom of speech? I mean, freedom of speech must surely mean absolute freedom of speech.
Why?
Well, I mean, either you have the freedom to say whatever you want or you don't.
Well, you don't. You don't have the freedom to say whatever you want, but do you have enough freedom to get by day to day? For me, yeah. And how do I do that? By picking and choosing what I say, picking and choosing the people I
So
speak
who's
to.
who's who's telling you that? Where's the internal voice coming from?
The internal voice,
Mm,
yeah, the good, the right and wrong, the good and bad, the convenience and the inconvenience, is the law and not the law. If it got to that stage, if I was in the stadium watching the football, now I'm not allowed to say a whole bunch of things I would have said 30, 40 years ago. I mean, in that respect, it's different, and these days they're enforced by law. So, when I go to watch a football game, what I would say these days are not the same things as I would have said 40 years ago. Big
mm,
difference. Big difference.
it's
Yeah.
the topography has changed a lot on the social landscape,
Yeah, but I
hasn't it?
accept it. I accept the fact that now when I go to the stadium, I'm gonna just have to button my lip, whereupon in the old days I could bend. Does this have a great effect on my life? Not really. But yeah, it's disappointing because you see things moving in what I consider to be the wrong direction.
I think it's interesting that you can say that though, coming from a context which generally has um, allowed freedom of speech, an educational background where it's almost encouraged to debate and discuss and to air people's opinions. I mean, there are, of course, many cultures and countries whereby you are not afforded that total
Well, we
luxury.
know about those. I mean, communist countries, highly religious countries, this and that. There's a bunch of them, and looking on the list of 180 countries, and which countries are ranked top of the freedom of speech, it's not who you would expect it to be. Yeah. And right down the bottom is everybody who you would expect it to be, which I found kind of interesting.
So who was at the top?
Scandinavian countries, and the country where I used to live, which was amazing. It was number 5. I used to live in Central America, Costa Rica, ranking number 5 for freedom of speech. Now, I used to enjoy.
Which just for the benefit of our viewers, which was the lowest, and who
Well, all the communist countries, the Cubas, the Chinas, the Vietnams, and of course, the what we would call the stricter countries. You know, let's say places like Sudan, Saudi, where we used to work, and places like this, along the lines of obviously the places where you'd have to be a little more careful what you said. If you were out of the house. So I mean, nothing untoward there. And then top of the list, of course, were the Scandinavian, the Swedens, the Denmarks, and what have you. And England, well down, not surprisingly. Yeah, everybody says, "Oh, in England we got freedom of speech." No, no, you don't, my friends. You don't have. Oh, not according to the table, anyway. Yeah.
Where was it ranked?
33, right down there. Yeah. And then there was another one for freedom of the press, and I think that's a little bit different. And you can help me out here about the significance of freedom of the press and how that would differ from freedom of speech. But I'm just wanted to keep the conversation in really to which is what is relevant for us. How it affects our lives. I mean, yeah, of course, we know that if you go to one of these stricter countries, you're not allowed to get up on the Hyde Park corner and shoot your mouth off. You're not going to be allowed to do that. And you accept that, I think, don't you?
I think you're not given a lot of choice, really, on this one.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we can, as early on into our discussion about this, the picture is emerging that freedom of speech comes in relative degrees, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah. And don't forget, you see, if you're in one of those more, how we say, stricter countries, you'd grow up with that. Okay, you would already know that's where you are. I think it gets difficult when you come from a place like what we do. We're both British, and we come from a country which is sort of in transition and tightening up the rules of freedom of speech. I think that's where it gets frustrating for me. What about you?
Yeah, I don't like authority. I don't like people telling me what I can say and what I can't say.
Well, who does?
And I tend to buck the trend, if somebody tries to tell me. I've worked in several countries around the world, and sometimes I have had, silly issues with this, where
but it's getting something off your chest as much as anything.
Yeah,
you don't really have anything to say. You just want
Pardon?
to. Well, I mean, what I'm saying, you don't get up and say, I insist on a change of regime here.
No,
I mean, of course
no,
not.
no. Actually, it's an interesting point you raised there. I don't do it for that reason. I actually want to be able to express my opinion and listen to other people's opinions, because freedom of speech is just about as much as listening as what it is about speaking your opinion, and for me personally, that's healthy.
Yeah, me too. I like that.
I'm not out to say you're right or wrong, but if somebody's trying to gag me, I kind of get affronted by that.
I think anybody does, especially coming from what we would probably consider, one of the more sort of, freer countries, for want of a better way of putting it. It's not a good word to use here, but I mean, when we were growing up, we kind of could do more or less as we pleased. But then, we always had to self-moderate. There were always times when you thought, well, I can't say that to him or her.
Well, is freedom of speech offensive?
Yeah, I mean, to me it is, and obviously to you, but obviously it's.
How is it offensive?
What, not having it? You mean you're talking about the restrictions?
No, I'm talking about generally speaking. If I want to say X, Y, Z, you see, I can't say it now because
right.
I'm,
right.
I feel kind of, why not? Why can't I say
But
it?
does it
Because I,
does it weigh heavy on you, Paul?
well, if there's a likelihood that I'd be killed, or yeah.
Yeah, but what I mean, does it worry you the fact that as you go
No, it
through?
annoys me.
Yeah, of course it does. It's an
Yeah, it's
irritation.
an irritation, and
Yeah,
it's a silliness.
yeah, I know.
It's a
Yeah, I
childishness.
mean, the reason why we can talk fluently about this subject as opposed to other ones we've tried is because we talk about this quite a lot, and we do have a difference of opinion in some respects, but basically not. We both find, the restriction on what you can say an irritant, because we both come from more or less the same background, and therefore how things have tightened up and changed over perhaps the last 15, 20 years. I don't think that's agreeable to us. We're not at the right age for change anyway. So
I think the irony is, of course, if they said no, you can say anything you like, I
mm,
probably wouldn't be interested.
exactly, yeah,
You know,
yeah, right.
it's this idea that because you are offended, you've made me offended, and now we're into
Mm,
loggerheads over an issue of completely polarized viewpoints.
right, right. Mm,
Whereas if we had total free speech, nobody's going to really give a monkeys, you know. If I say something that offends a religion,
mm,
and they say something that offends me, I mean,
mm,
I don't like people who spit, you know. But I mean, I, I mean, there are certain things that
mm,
you know, I could say which are offensive to certain
mm.
people.
Do you think there's anything which would offend you, which would go under
No,
the category of, well, that shouldn't offend him? Because I know we have this chat a lot, and we're not going to
mm,
get specific here, but sometimes we say something off the cuff, and somebody's offended by something what we would consider was just a normal comment. Now, coming back at us, is there anything you can think of which somebody would say to us? Yeah,
well,
old age. I mean, somebody said, "Oh, well, really, your opinion just
no,
doesn't
because
matter."
it's their opinion
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they're entitled to
I
it.
agree.
What I find
Entitled to it, but yeah,
what I find difficult is this idea that, you know, it's become a mantle. You know, you're offending somebody. You know,
no,
so
I hate that. Yeah, yeah,
you shouldn't say anything. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I mean, I talk here. I get it to some extent. I know that one should perhaps be nicer to people. I mean, I remember writing to one of
well,
the.
hang on, let me just pull you up on that.
Mm,
Nicer to people.
yeah, I think
Okay,
that's the trend.
all right,
Very
okay,
much the
okay,
trend.
but if you're harboring a truth about them, which is being nicer, lying to them or harboring the truth?
Apparently it's lying, and this is what we're led to believe. It's interesting, going on from what I was saying there. I wrote a few years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I wrote to one of the teachers I had at school. We called them masters, and asked him, he was still at the school where I went to school, 40 years ago. And I asked him about the place and how was it. And he said it was a kinder place. And I asked him, well, what do you mean by that? He said, back in your days, which is a long time ago now, it was a brutal place. I think that's probably the trend, isn't it? I think
It's a moddy cuddling again, isn't it?
it is very much so, but it's how apparently, whoever is in charge, and we haven't really established who's in charge, they want us to be nicer to people, nicer to each other.
Well, I'm not going to argue against that,
Mm.
um, but I don't know. I mean, has it drastically changed for us? Do you
Well, will
think?
it affected us? No,
Mm,
it hasn't affected us, but then again, nothing much does, because we're kind of, we live fairly solitary lives compared to other people.
mm,
I mean, that's fair to say, I think. But I mean, yeah, if you were living in, like we used to perhaps in mainstream Western Europe, and we were sort of living and working there and going down to the pub and socializing, I think our lives would be somewhat different. Not lives, but what we were able to say going out would be different, don't you think?
I think you have a point there, and I think it'd be interesting, wouldn't it? I mean, it's a long time since I've been in a UK pub, for example.
Mm.
But if you started to stoke up a conversation in a pub, especially if you, and lubricated the matter a little bit,
Mm.
it'd be interesting to see, if it got to a certain point where people started to prick their ears
No,
up
I think it
on.
will come quickly.
You
I
think that
really,
would
yeah,
come?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I
yeah.
do, and I'll base this on some personal experience. And when I was
Mm.
in your hometown, 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, I was having difficulty talking to people, not because they're from a different part of the world, but I was thinking, here you are, you're back in where actually you kind of come from, your country. And now I was actually having to sort of mind what I was saying, as I was
You
drinking.
felt that consciously, did you?
Definitely,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, really did. I mean, like before when we used to go down the pub or go to the football, which was my opening, sort of example. You went there to vent. You go down the pub to have a few beers and let off steam, and you would go to the football so you could, in our case, yell at people like Kenny Dalglish and all the
Mm.
ones we wanted to, and there was nobody around to say
Interesting,
boo
isn't
to a
it? Yeah.
goose. Nobody would have said anything. Yeah,
Mm.
we used to say shocking things to them about them.
I
You
can
can't
I,
do that
I, I
now.
can remember the days when I was a youngster, and Dad would take my brother and I to Goodison Park, which is Everton's football ground, and I used to sort of be. I was only very young, very young, early.
6, 7, 8.
No, early teens,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
but you would hear this ripple of abuse.
Yeah.
Somebody would kick it off,
Mm,
and it would just escalate
mm,
and snowball.
yeah.
So they'd be this black person, okay,
Mm,
who would be referred to as something else, and
mm,
and it would just bounce around
mm,
the stand,
mm,
and people would tag on to it,
yeah, yeah.
and and it was great. It wasn't very pleasant for the person who was on the football
Yeah, I
pitch,
mean,
but it was
and
banter.
it's well to back that up. The abuse directed at the person wasn't, and we're going to be discussing uh, racism in another video. But the fact is that when we're shouting at the footballers, it's because they're on the wrong team, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think for a minute,
Mm,
not one of those people in
no,
in that crowd
mm,
would really want to intentionally harm that
no,
person.
not at all. But that wouldn't stop
And
them.
I'm
Mm,
sure
mm,
they would say, knowing Liverpool and my hometown,
mm,
I'm sure they would say, hey, they would love to take them into a bar afterwards and say, "Here, lad, have a pint,"
mm,
you
mm,
know.
mm.
So it's for me, it's not about intentionally, maliciously wanting to inflict any psychological or personal or harm on the person.
Mm.
Now, put myself in that position, how would I feel? Imagine if I was in Nigeria and somebody was shouting out, "You white bastard,"
Mhm.
how would I get on?
Okay, well let's put it,
Hmm.
let's look at it a different way around. I mean, are we more sensitive to what people say as a result of these sort of, let's say, new rules? Are we now to be offended along with everybody else? I mean, for me, I'm still thick-skinned. You can let me have it. It wouldn't worry me. What about you? Do
I,
you feel you're more sensitive now than you were 20 years ago?
No, I just want to reclaim what I feel is my right
Mm,
to express myself as I feel.
mm.
And if the other person on the receiving end of that is not mature enough to be able to deal with that, well, I'm very sorry. Go and kiss my ass. I mean, um,
Mm,
because you can say what you want to me, and I hope as I mature and I grow in my wisdom, I hope I'm educated enough to be able to take it on the chin.
mm. Yeah.
You
Okay, good
know,
point.
yeah.
Well,
Well,
that's about it. Just
yeah.
about concludes this afternoon's chit chat. Thanks for watching again. Like, subscribe if you like these kind of chit chatty videos. We'll be back in a couple of days to do another one. I'm Ted. This is Paul. We'll see you soon.
Bye for now.